Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and I am here today at the IRCGN's Ballistic Laboratory. That is the main firearms reference library of the French Gendarmerie, and they have very graciously allowed me to pull out a few guns to film and show to you guys. And what we have to start with today is this fantastically rare North Korean Type 73 LMG. Now, what is this thing? It certainly looks funky. This is, frankly, this is the result of several of North Korea's previous leaders, Kim Jong-il and Kim Il-sung, both being significant fans. They're both, actually gun guys, and they were both big fans of Czechoslovakian firearms in particular. And they appear to have taken a look at, well, among others, there are a bunch of Czech guns that ended up with shades of Czech guns in North Korean designs. But in this case, what they took inspiration from was the Czech 52/57 light machine gun, which is a design that was put together that could use either box magazines or belts. And North Korea copied that concept, but they scaled it up to 7.62 by 54 rimmed and essentially grafted that concept onto a copy of the Soviet PK. So fundamentally, that's what we have here, is a North Korean copy of the PK modified or redesigned a bit to take box magazines as well as belts. So we have our belt opening right there. We'll take a look at this up close in a moment. We have what looks like basically an oversized AK magazine, along with a magazine cover when it's not in use. The concept here was it's difficult to move around with, for example, a PK with a belt of a box of ammunition hanging off the bottom. You're looking at 100 or 200 rounds. It's heavy, it's awkward, it's loud. It would be a lot easier to be mobile with a squad support weapon like this that had a box magazine. Box doesn't make noise, it's a lot lighter, it's more out of the way, more or less. The problem is, of course, the box magazine is of very limited capacity and not very good for sustained fire. So the concept here was you would carry this with a box magazine in it for any sort of immediate action that might be necessary, for example, on a patrol or something. And then, if you got into a position where you actually had to be using the gun for sustained fire, that's when you would instead start feeding it belts. You'd have one of the other guys, several probably other guys in the squad, carrying belted ammunition. They could bring it up to supply the machine gun. And of course, if the gun is set up in a static defensive position, or if being used in a static position for an assault, something, you can always just feed it from belts. Now, this was introduced, as far as we can tell, in 1973, and, well, it's been very, very rare to find them outside of North Korea. So we'll talk about how this got to the point where I've got it on camera, and what happened to these guns in service in a few minutes. But first, let's take a look at the inside of this and how it actually works. Because that magazine, there's more to this magazine than meets the eye. All right, where to even start here? Let's start with the markings. So on our top cover here, we have the magazine cover plate. So that's where the magazine would actually feed, and when we have it closed, we have a North Korean star inside a double circle, and we have a 73, a Type 73 marking right there, and then we have the serial number of this particular example, 509112, on the belt feed area. There aren't any other markings on the gun, except for a few additional serial numbers, which do match here. So we got serial numbers on a couple other places. Fundamentally here, this is of course a copy of the PK. It's of course worth remembering that the K in PK is for Kalashnikov, and so much of the construction of the PK is similar to the construction of the AK, insofar as we have a large stamped sheet metal receiver with front and rear trunnions riveted in, so you can see these big rivets there. Obviously there's much more substantial mechanism built in here, because it is, of course, in a larger caliber, 7.62 by 54 rimmed, and there's more going on with the belt feed mechanism. But fundamentally, what we have here is a PK. The safety here is a bit different from a standard PK. This is, in fact, a safety that's basically taken straight off Degtyarev DPM or RP46. It's, I think, important to point out that prior to using these, North Korea made its own version of the RP-46, which is the belt-fed version of the Degtyarev DP-27. And they have copied the safety mechanism. So this is safe and fire. There is no specific semi-auto functionality to it. And it has selector markings that are in Korean instead of Russian. The overall buttstock design is also pretty typically North Korean. Nothing really fundamental going on here. There is a shoulder rest that can be folded out like so. And there is a trap in the stock, much like an RPD, for a cleaning kit, which really does not want to come open. We'll leave that alone. Now there are some unusual things going on at the front end of the gun. First off, I'll point out that we have a fluted barrel here to reduce weight. Mechanically, we've got our gas tube down here, barrel up there, gas block, all those parts as you would expect them. What you don't necessarily expect is this stuff. In particular, this flip-up sight. Of course, we have an offset front sight. The offset front sight is there, of course, because you've got a magazine potentially right on the top center line of the gun, and so you have to have the sights offset to see around it. You don't have a magazine there if you're using the belt feed, but there's no point in having two sets of sights. Although actually there are sort of two sets of sights, because this is a separate front sight that is used specifically for rifle grenades. You don't normally see rifle grenade capability on a light machine gun, but with the Type 73 they indeed have that. So we have 50, 75, and 100 meter ranges there, and then we can also, there we go, lift that up for 150. And what you would do is use these holes as your rear sight aperture, typically using the nose of the grenade as the front sight for launching grenades. You may have recognized it already, but the ribs on here are specifically for rifle grenades, so you can slide a grenade over this and get a little bit of a gas seal, sort of. Now, one of the interesting features of the Type 73 is that, well, you might not always want to use rifle grenades. You might instead want to have the functions of a muzzle brake. Well, you can do that because stored under the gas block here is a slide-on muzzle device that gives you a 2-port muzzle brake. So this locks on to a little bayonet connector down here, and when I want to fit it to the gun, it simply slides over. These two lugs line up with these two sockets, and then on the opposite side we have a little locking pin that snaps into place and holds that on. And thus you can get a muzzle brake instead of the rifle grenade capability. Down here we have bipod legs. These are interesting in that you can see they're kind of an unusual shape. These are actually intended to hold cleaning rod sections. So you should have 2 cleaning rod sections on each side of each bipod leg. That's why there is this collar at the front, which locks the cleaning rod sections in place. It's a cool way to store the cleaning rod without needing to find a place for it elsewhere on the gun. Now, these just fold down. There is some pivot to them. There is no lock to the bipod leg, so they're pretty tightly bolted in. These legs are basically taken straight from the North Korean RP-46 or Degtyarev guns. They have the same setup for storing cleaning rods. They have the same style of locking bolt. So you can see the bolt right there. It really is just a bolt that locks the legs down. And then we have this little spring strap to hold the legs together, to hold them in the retracted position. Before we move on, let's take a look at the rear sight. It is, of course, offset to match the front. This whole thing, well, so this is your battle sight with it folded down, and you have a notch there. The whole thing flips up like so for long-range use. You can get out to 2,000 or more meters and using this rear notch. So this top drum is a micrometer that allows you to adjust the range settings. Really good, solid click detents on that. That sight's not gonna wobble out of place at all. Certainly doesn't feel like it anyway. All right, now we can get to the really interesting stuff, which is the inside. We have a release latch back here for the top cover. The top cover is nicely spring-loaded, so it stays up out of the way when you open it. We have a feed tray there as well, and then we have a typical PK style of system. So when I pull the charging handle back, this hook is going to grab a cartridge from the belt, pull it backwards out of the belt, and then there's space here for it to feed down into the bolt. There is a little spring ramp on the bottom of the top cover, which you can't quite see in this angle, but that pushes the cartridge down out of these hooks into the chamber where it locks into place and feeds into the gun. And that's all fine for a PK belt. And it's important for a PK belt because this uses 7.62 by 54 rimmed, which has a very large, well, rim on it, which makes it very difficult to design a belt that you can actually push the cartridge forward through. The USM60, for example, uses a push-through belt. The Maxim guns all had pull-out style of belts, as does the PK, which interestingly actually uses Maxim belts. The PK was designed around the same belt that the Russian 1910 Maxim had. Now, the question is, how do you adapt this to a box magazine? Box magazines, as we all know, are set for, the bolt pushes a cartridge forward out of the magazine. Well, in this case, what the North Koreans did was redesign the magazine to be actually like, well, there are only two other guns I know of that do this. One of them is the Boberg, and one of them is the Mars automatic pistol. The idea here is this actually pulls cartridges backwards out of the magazine. So you can see these hooks, these loops here on top, prevent a cartridge from coming up out of the top of the gun. There are no feed lips here because it doesn't feed in the same traditional sense. Instead, this claw is going to grab a cartridge rim right here. You can see the back corner of the magazine is cut out to allow the rim to be exposed. So these claws are going to grab that rim, pull the cartridge out the back of the magazine, just like they would with a belt. So this is a little bit difficult to see here, but when I have a belt in position and when I have the magazine in position, we actually have a cartridge being presented in exactly the same position so that the feed system can work equally well from either one. That is why this is a single feed magazine. Normally double feed magazines that can present two cartridges at the top, alternating left and right. Normally that's a better system, but for this specific application, because the belt is only a single feed position, the magazine has to be as well. When we get into the guts of the gun, there are a couple other differences. So this is going to disassemble just like a PK. So you can lift the recoil spring out the back. We can lift our feed tray up. You pull the bolt handle back, and then the whole bolt carrier gas piston assembly has a pivot in it, is articulated so that you can just lift it out. Most guns like this, you have to take the stock off or somehow open up the back of the receiver to take all the pieces out. The PK is quite cleverly designed in that you don't. Now, once I've got this, the bolt is going to come out just like an HK bolt. Whoops. And then this is a little bit different from a standard PK. So let me finish disassembly here, and then we'll compare this to a regular Soviet gun. We have our same feed pulse system here as on the PK, and we have a barrel lock, which I'm going to push off to the side right there. And then I can use this cam on the handle to pull the barrel out. There we go. So there's your barrel locking surface. This is our North Korean Type 73 bolt carrier, and this is a standard Russian PKM bolt carrier. And there are a number of differences you can spot. So of course the basic design, the mechanical function, is identical. However, you can see that the Soviets, the Russians, put in, well, it would have been the Soviets when this one was made, put in a lot more time and a lot more detail on some of the machine work. So we have lightning cuts like these and this cut right here on the side, and we have some curved areas that just don't exist. The North Korean one has much simpler machining to it. So, for example, this rail right here has just a flat square end cut to it, where on the Russian gun, there's a bit of a curved profile. Now, the most significant visible difference is the attachment of this claw. So on the Russian one, the claw is located just up here, and this has to be a separate part because it has to be heat treated differently than the rest of the bolt carrier. The idea is these little fingers, this claw, has to be spring-loaded. So this has to be tempered just right so that it has both the strength and the flexibility to constantly, for tens of thousands of repetitions, pop over a rim and then pull the cartridge out without fracturing. So the only effective way to do that is to make this a separate component and heat treat it. So you can see where the Russians have mounted that claw, and they have mounted it permanently in there. The North Koreans, however, have actually used the bolt as the component to hold this claw on. So if I take the bolt out, the claw just slides right off, and you can see it's this hole right here running through there that locks the piece in place when the gun is actually assembled. So the same idea. This is again just to have different heat treat on the extractor claws there. Not extractor, the belt feed claws there. But they put it together a bit differently. And of course, as I showed you earlier, none of the lightning cuts that the Soviet model has are present here on the North Korean one. Just simplifies the manufacturing. The two bolts, this guy is Russian, this one over here on the right is North Korean. Those are essentially identical as far as I can tell. Same firing pin design, same extractor design. Everything about those is the same. There are again a few differences on the recoil springs. This is fairly minor, but our North Korean one here is a solid metal plate that's just used as a tab to take this out for disassembly. On the Russian one, or the Soviet one, this is actually more of a fiber, a buffer that absorbs some of the impact from the bolt carrier. So, and a little bit of difference in the specific design of the end of the spring guide. There are a couple of differences in the barrels, mostly aesthetic. The profile, the North Korean gun is actually a bit of a heavier profile barrel. They're both the same length. The Soviet one looks a bit longer because it has the muzzle device on it, the flash hider on it. The gas blocks, however, are significantly different. Note that we have a mismatched barrel here. And then the North Korean gas regulator is adjusted at the front, and we have a 0 setting on it for rifle grenades, which is important. So you're not trying to run the action with the increased excessive recoil of launching a rifle grenade. So we got that, and then positions 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And then the whole thing can unscrew. So we're going to leave that at its proper position. Also worth pointing out here that the carry handles, or the barrel handles, are slightly different. On the Russian gun, the barrel handle actually comes off to the left and is straight. On the North Korean, on the Type 73, first off, the handle is actually bent right here, and that is deliberate. This isn't the only barrel that they have here for these, and they all have exactly the same bend. So it looks like something that is unintentional damage, but no, that's exactly how it's meant to be. And it comes off the right side of the gun, and this, one would presume, is to help ensure that it doesn't get in the way of the sights, which are offset to the left. So sights on the left, barrel handle on the right. So there you have a field-stripped North Korean Type 73. In North Korean service, this doesn't appear to have been all that successful. Frankly, the Czech 52-57 wasn't really all that successful either. The concept of belt or magazine feed, dual feed systems, never really took off. As far as I can tell, it's something that sounded better on paper than it actually was in practice. And it turned out people just always wanted to go with the belts, and so having the magazine feet was sort of an extraneous complication to the gun. It made them more expensive to manufacture. It gives you extra openings for dirt to get in, other potential malfunctions, and all that sort of stuff. So this was replaced in North Korean service by the Type 82 in 1982 or thereabouts, the 82 being essentially a straight copy of the PKM. So much of the same gun, just get rid of the magazine system. Now, as for these getting out, North Korea sold a bunch of these to Iran during the Iran-Iraq War in the late 1980s. Now, I don't know about the specific provenance of this particular one, but these have been showing up more in recent years in North Africa and the Middle East. And the general suspicion, the general understanding is that Type 73s that went to Iran have then been resold on to a variety of different powers in the Middle East and North Africa, especially some of those countries that are under international embargo or otherwise unable to buy guns on sort of a more open global arms market. Well, they can buy some stuff from Iran. So you see these percolating out into places like Libya, like Yemen, and once they're out in the Middle East and North Africa, then they kind of tend to wander across borders. And this particular one, I expect, was brought back to the IRCGN by one of France's many special forces missions operating in the Middle East and North Africa, doing counterterrorism work. So fantastically cool to get a chance to take a look at this. And I think really this exemplifies some of the mission of the IRCGN's lab here. They have a firearms collection that is meant to be a reference collection for understanding and combating crime and terrorism. And so to have something like this can be a fantastic reference piece. So hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. A great big thanks to the Gendarmerie for giving me the opportunity to film it. Thanks for watching.